A scathing bestseller by former national security advisor, an underwhelming campaign rally in Tulsa rattles the president and his people. We'll get a shoot from the hip perspective from financier Anthony Scaramucci. He lasted less than 2 weeks as the Trump White House communications director, and now he's pushing disaffected Republicans to elect Joe Biden. Anthony Scaramucci, former Trump White House communications director, founder and managing partner of the investment firm Skybridge Capital. Well, Anthony, good to have you with us. Trump held his first campaign rally in Tulsa. What did you take away from that event?
Well, I want to be as balanced as possible, Larry. Thank you for having me on. I would say the event was underwhelming from an attendance perspective, but I think they got a lot of rich data out of all of that registration that went on. But I think he, knowing his personality reasonably well, I think he was very disappointed on Saturday night.
How much trouble is he in? You have your fingertips on everything. Is he in big trouble?
I do think he's in big trouble. I think that the momentum is swinging very hard against him right now. But this is a very good prize fighter. And so, if it's a boxing metaphor, he has to be knocked out of the ring. A knockdown, a TKO, you're not going to win this on a decision. You have to send him right through the ropes. So one of the good things that happened to him the other night, he did so poorly that it could create some complacency on the other side. And so if they want to beat him, they've got to come at him 3 times harder now.
I know him for 40 years. I know you know him. He seems to have no empathy. In other words, he's talking about the statues, let's say, of the Confederacy. And instead of saying, I understand how Black Americans could feel, he just rips them apart and says, don't tear them down, their great American heritage. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the problem is, as I said this in the paper, he's the modern LBJ, and so his skill set is hitting an era of time where all of the things that he was good at that got him to where he is not helping him for where he is right now. And so that's the problem. He doesn't have that empathy skill set. He doesn't have that emotional EQ. And so he's right now pitting a culture war. He's got the red Republican tribe against the blue Democratic tribe, and he's saying, hold on to the heritage. This is like our guns. This is like our prayer books. He's trying to create that dynamic rather than trying to unify the country. I think that's a mistake.
Is making fun of Biden a mistake?
Yes, I think making fun of Biden is a mistake because he is not Secretary Clinton, and so he can't lay a knockout punch on Joe Biden because Vice President Biden is not as polarizing as Secretary Clinton. Moreover, kudos to Vice President Biden. He's never taken the bait. 19 politicians, Larry, took the bait. Sleepy this, liar that, low energy this. All those politicians took the bait from President Trump. But Joe Biden just keeps humming along. And I know it really bothers President Trump that he's getting thumped like this. Joe being in his basement, Larry, or Vice President Biden being in the basement, and him being the president and getting crushed in the polls, I know it's driving him crazy.
Is Donald Trump a racist?
Well, yes, he's a racist because his actions are quite racist. He does crazy things. He's talking about Ilhan Omar, and she's going to govern the country like Somalia. He said last summer, go back to the countries you originally came from. Those are racist tropes. But you just mentioned he doesn't have any empathy, and so that's classic of a narcissist. And most narcissists just objectify people. So you're not racist against a black or a white car. So in that respect, he's such a narcissist that you can't call him a racist the way you could call a KKK leader a racist. But yes, he's pulling racist tropes out of his playbook to try to win this election. And so for those reasons, classically defined, he's an abject racist, Larry.
How do you explain his kind of cavalier attitude about the coronavirus?
Well, again, I think that's his skill set. He was looking at the facts and he said, wait a minute, these facts are not what I want. And so what he's often tried to do in his life is through reality distortion, he tried to lie his way throughout his life to another reality. And so it's one thing to stand up in front of a camera and yell fake news and do that sort of thing. But what you can't do, Larry, is yell fake science. You know, he gets to the camera with the coronavirus, he acts cavalierly, and he's like telling the American public that 2 + 2 = 7, but yet they can see on their hands that it equals 4, and they panic and they start to realize how disingenuous he is. And so this skill set of deflection, this skill set of over-salesmanship and the overzealousness of selling is not working when met up against scientific calamity and scientific fact. And that's why he's having such a hard time right now.
What caused your separation from him?
Well, listen, he fired me. I met you in that beautiful kosher diner of yours out in Beverly Hills. I was still loyal to the guy. I had no problem with it. I never took my firing personally. I became friends with General Kelly after the firing, and I went on television and tried to promote the president's agenda. But when he started telling the 4 women, the members of the squad, the progressive left, to go back to the countries they originally came from, I told Mayor Giuliani, hey, wait a minute, I'm Italian American. They told my grandmother that. That is a racist nativist trope. I can't support that. I'm very sorry. I said on the Bill Maher show last August, I wish President Trump would stop saying that. And so then he took it upon himself to attack me on Twitter. And so then I think I called him Fidel Adolf Trump. I tried to get the fat shaming in there with the dictatorship. And that got him crazy. And then he started coming back at me. You know I'm a New Yorker, so I just started blasting him. And then he did what Trump does. He went after my wife, who's basically a suburban housewife. You met her in Italy, if you don't remember, a few years ago. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. My wife's got nothing to do with this. And I'm not Ted Cruz. You know, if you're going to attack my wife, I'm an Italian kid from Long Island. I'm ready to go. And so I will continue to punch until he's out of office. It's really just that simple. You're not going after my wife without having a real fight with me. And so, you know, but listen, like I said last year, if he's attacking me after I gave him $1 million for his campaign, the transition, all of that stuff, I worked for him, got fired, and stayed loyal. If he's attacking me because I didn't like the racist comment that he made about the congresswoman, then he's got a screw loose. And what I said last summer, this is like Trump Noble. There's something wrong with the guy cognitively. He's going to start melting down at the core. And then the Republicans are going to have to make a decision. Are they going to cover it up like they were trying to do in Trump Noble or Chernobyl? Or are they going to clean it up? And they made the decision to cover it up. And that was a dramatic and disastrous mistake for them because now he is a millstone around their necks going into November.
What's your overview of the Bolton book?
So it's interesting. My Father's Day gift was for me to sit home yesterday and read that damn thing. So I read about 400 of the 600 pages. It is very damning. It is a full-blown indictment on the president. Ambassador Bolton goes very far in Chapter 8 in discussing full-blown criminal activity. And so I call Chapter 8 of that book the Orange Jumpsuit Chapter. I think the Democrats are sore at Ambassador Bolton for not making that testimony available during the impeachment. But I say otherwise. The Republicans, to quote President Trump, Donald Trump could have shot people on Fifth Avenue and they still would have acquitted him. Don't ask me why. History will have to judge that and resolve that. But Ambassador Bolton, I think, is correct. No matter what he had said, in the ensuing impeachment trial, they still would have acquitted him. And I think he was locked and loading for the election coming up. And I think this book is a very damning indictment of what the president has done. And you'll look to see the Biden campaign and Republicans like myself that are against President Trump use the book as fodder come November to explain how dangerous this man is to our civilized society and to the American way of life.
why aren't there more Republicans like you? I mean, Mitt Romney has broken with him, but other than that, they seem to stand tall with him. Why?
Well, they asked John Kennedy wrote 3 books. He wrote Why England Slept, The Nation of Immigrants, and he wrote a book that he won the Pulitzer Prize for, A Profile in Courage. It was a very thin book. Teddy Wright said to him, why was that book so thin? And John Kennedy said, well, there's no courage out there. I mean, I was looking for senators in the Senate through American history that broke from their party and stood on principles and the foundational patriotism of the American democracy and its Constitution, and I couldn't find that many. And I think that that's evident today. Moreover, Larry, this is not the greatest generation. These guys never served together in the war. Howard Baker, he looked around. The senator from Kansas, Bob Dole, they were all war veterans. And they said, wait a minute, we saw our brothers die and spill their blood in Europe or in Asia for this document and for our freedom. We are going to stick to the rule of law. We didn't see that this time. It's a damning indictment on those men and women. But I do think there's an opportunity here. If we can defeat President Trump, we can go on and rebuild the Republican Party. This is the biggest schism in the Republican Party since the Jerry Ford, Ronald Reagan schism in 1976. And I think if he goes, which I predict he will, by the way, we can reset the Republican Party and open its tent demographically to make it a more inclusive party and a more competitive party. If he wins, God forbid, he's going to narrow down the lane of that party, and it will be a minority party for a generation.
A recent biography, Anthony, of Melania Trump has made the bestseller list. Apparently, she has more power, or she... What do you make of that marriage?
Well, listen, I think they liked each other in the beginning. I saw interviews of Mr. and Mrs. Trump on your show 10, 15, 20 years ago. I would push it back to you. They seemed quite affectionate with each other. She seemed like she was really in love with him in the beginning of their relationship. I can't speak to it today. I interacted with her a few times during the campaign. She couldn't have been more pleasant or more down to earth. I found her to be a very warm person. I think sometimes she's a little guarded in public, and I understand that. That's part of her discipline. But I like her a great deal, and I think she really liked him. I think she was in love with him when she met him.
Yeah, their first date was at my charity event in Washington. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, in a weekend interview, Bolton said the most important person in the White House is Jared Kushner. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree with that because he's got a portfolio that's the size of the continent of the North America, and it's an international portfolio, that matter. And I think, frankly, for rightful reasons, the president trusts him. He's an in-law or a family member. Although in a Jewish or an Italian family, in-laws are outlaws. You remember that, right, Mr. King? So, but I mean, from this perspective, he's inside that orbit, and so I think the president trusts him, and I think he has a lot of power away from the things that President Trump wants to handle himself.
All right, tell me about your political action committee called Right Side. What is it, and what's its purpose?
Well, I mean, we came up with a clever name. We're from the right. I'm a Republican, and so this is another movement of Republicans against President Trump and for Vice President Biden. And so Right Side was a play on the words right side of history, to be on the right side of history. And what we're doing is it's a grassroots effort, and we're going to be raising money, deploying some of it in ads, but mostly creating a field operation. I expect to be in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and parts of Wisconsin, explaining to people who could have potentially voted for then candidate Trump 4 years ago why he is a systemic danger to their way of life and why we need to rebuild, repair, and renew the American spirit and the American enterprise and democratic system. And he's just not the right guy to do that. And so we're trying to put together a mosaic, a very colorful mosaic of men and women who will bind together and reject this sort of tribalism and this sort of racism. And I tell people when I'm out campaigning, I say, listen, the first name of the country is United. Each one of us has a story. Many of us faced, or our grandparents faced, some level of immigration horrors or discrimination. But we're here to create progress. We're here to heal the society and make the future better. I don't want to have a war over the past and which statue belongs where. I want to talk about where we are today and how we can go forward together and make this an aspirational society for all walks of life, all races, colors, and creeds and sexual preferences. And Mr. Trump's not capable of doing that. To your point, he doesn't have any empathy. And so he's not the right type of leader for a country that needs unity right now.
Anthony, finally, based on whatever we've heard tonight, why are you a Republican?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I grew up, my dad's a very funny story. Only David Axelrod actually knew this, but the Republican Party controlled the unions in Nassau County, Long Island. And so my dad was a crane operator. He was an hourly worker for the union. I was 17, yeah. My dad was a blue-collar worker. And so I went to my pops. I was 17, about to turn 18. I said, Dad, I'm going to register to vote. What party am I registering for? He goes, oh, no, you're a Republican. You got to vote Republican. Those are the people that are helping me with my salary. And so I said, okay, great, I'm a Republican. And then when I got to college, Ronald Reagan was in office. He was a popular figure back then with young people. And I got to, read about him and the politics and so forth. And I became what you would remember to be an Eisenhower, Rockefeller, moderate New York Republican. And so I sort of, I'm a loyal guy. I happen to be a Met fan, and you and I were talking before the show started how much pain that is. And so, I'm a loyal guy, and I want to see this party fix itself. And so that's why that's why I'm a Republican. But we've got a ways to go in the Republican Party. We've allowed President Trump to really damage it.
Anthony, thank you so much. It was great having you with us.
Oh, it's great to be here. I'm a huge fan of yours, Larry. I've listened to your audio tapes, everything about you. I'm a huge fan. God bless you, sir.